Hi, it's me again. I just wanted to do a little quick intro to the interview that you're gonna see. It's about 40 minutes and it's an interview with a mixing engineer and a recording engineer who's been in the game full time for about 11 years. And you know, if you're a music producer, that it's very hard to make a living from mixing alone. There's a lot of competition out there, but he's managed to do it. He posts constantly about it. His channel is great. Check it out. His name is Ty Donnelly. He has credits with Tory Lanez, French Montana, Popcan. Hopefully I pronounced that right. He has a lot of mixes behind his back, and I'm going to be asking questions that some of my followers have asked me and some questions that I came up with myself. So this is a raw interview, just talking and geeking out about music production. I'm going to ask him about how to organize projects, how to mix vocals, what type of plugins he's using, any plugins that save him time that he just found recently. He's also going to talk about the business side of things. How does he get projects? How does he stand out in the busy city of Toronto? So all of that is jam-packed in a 40-minute interview, which I think if you stick through it, you will find very useful, and you will 100% come out at least with something that you didn't know before. Thank you for stopping by. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to get more interviews like that. I've already posted around 3 or 4 on this channel, so go ahead and check them out. If you want to follow for daily content, I do have Instagram. I'll link it down below. All these interviews sort of come out in the short format as well, and this is just a full raw interview podcast, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully you enjoy my interview with Ty Donnelly. Peace. All right, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do, how long you've been doing it for, and all that jazz.
My name is Ty Donnelly. I'm a recording and mixing engineer. I'm in Toronto. I've been doing this full time for, I think, about 11 years now.
Wow.
Give or take.
Mixing engineering is the most thing they do?
I mean, mixing and mastering is kind of like the bread and butter. Mm-hmm. That's the majority of what I do most of the time. Mm-hmm. I do some recording on the side as well, just because it goes hand in hand. You know how it goes.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. What was your DAW journey like, and why did you stick with your current DAW?
I think like most people, I started out on FL Studios.
Okay.
Started with that more on the production side of things, because I started out as more of a producer and then kind of got into the engineering side of things later on. Mm-hmm. So I started with that. I went to, I want to say Mixcraft, and then and then Reaper. I think I went to Logic after that, and then settled on Pro Tools, what I'm at today.
Pro Tools, is that your favorite DAW?
It's, for me, I know it like the back of my hand. So it's, I've been on Pro Tools for probably 10 years now.
Okay. All right. When you receive a track from a client to mix, what are the most common issues that makes the mixing process difficult?
Good question. I'd say the main thing that could make a song difficult is having a bad recording. If somebody sends me a song and the recording is just kind of, I don't know, so many people are recording in their bedrooms and stuff these days. Mm-hmm. They don't really understand the importance of like sound treatment, like acoustic treatment, and how that can just stop reflections in the room and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people have poorly recorded vocals a lot of the time, mm-hmm. which can make the mixing process pretty difficult because you're doing more fixing than mixing, if that makes sense.
What was the worst story you've had with the type of recorded vocals?
I mean, there's been a bunch, man. But honestly, a lot of the times when something's so bad, mm-hmm. where it's like, I know I can't even make this sound good, mm-hmm. I'll just tell the person in a nice way, like, look, I don't know like what you're using. Maybe it's your microphone, maybe it's your interface, maybe it's the room that you're in. I'll ask them questions first to try to determine what is giving them that poor quality, okay. and try to help them just get a better quality. If their mic is in a big open room with no padding or anything, I'll say, hey, why don't you try putting it in like your closet where all your clothes are? Because the sound will get dampened by the clothes that are just in there naturally. Mm-hmm. So it's more so about like, yes, there are some horror stories, but then I try to help them get a better sound.
Okay, that brings me to the next question.
Okay.
What are your techniques to tell somebody that their mix is bad?
Their mix or their quality of recording?
Let's say quality of recording. How do you tell them you know, in a nice way without throwing the artist off so you can still keep the gig?
I mean, I'll just say like whatever I'm noticing with the quality of it, I'll say, hey, I'm noticing it just sounds really tubey, or there's too much reverb, natural reverb in your room. And go back to the same thing. Why don't you try putting the mic in the closet or something like that? I'll ask them what microphone they're using. And if they're just saying, oh, I'm just using this USB mic, I'll say, well, why don't you try, you know, you could spend a couple $100 and get a better mic than what you're using now. So I'll just be nice about what I think the problem is.
Cool.
And how they can solve it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
When getting a mixing project, how do you determine your price?
Well, I, for the most part, have set prices. I've got a rate that just includes vocal kind of mixing, if you just have the 2-track of the beat. I've got a rate that has, if you have the beat stems as well, plus obviously the vocals. And then I've kind of got my, whatever you want to call it, like label rate as well, which kind of is the top of the line for me, but has all the stuff like everything's stemmed out, or everything's just exactly how labels want the deliveries, or deliverables, sorry.
Would you ever accept somebody's project if they're like below your standard fee? If they have a good sort of, I don't know, scenario, or is it just your standard fee? If you don't meet that, that's it.
Yeah, there's certain situations where it's like the exposure makes more sense than the money up front.
Okay.
These days, I find a lot of people, especially at the point I'm at in my career, I find a lot of people respect the time and the effort that I've put into just making this what it is.
Right.
And just they respect like the amount of work that goes into it. So a lot of the times they, even if it is something where the exposure is still good for me, they'll still probably pay at the same time too.
Cool. Can you walk me through your approach to balancing different elements in the mix to achieve clarity and impact?
Well, I'd say one of the biggest things for me anyways, I mean, a lot of engineers are like this too, but just it's removing shit that doesn't need to be there. So removing or taking low end out that doesn't need to be on a guitar.
So rather than adding plugins,
Exactly.
you take things out.
To me, reducing is so key. And I think a lot of times people say, oh, no, I've got to boost. I've got to make it really bright. And you don't always necessarily have to do that. You can gain more clarity in the mix by simply doing reductive things.
Okay. And how do you find in the vocals, for example, how do you find the frequencies you want to remove? Do you kind of exaggerate your EQ and then sort of find that annoying frequency and then reduce it? Or what's your process on?
Yeah, I'll take an EQ, mainly probably Fab Filter, Pro Q3.
Yeah.
That's usually my go-to like sweeping EQ.
Right.
Where I'll just go through, solo something, sweep through the spectrum and just kind of see what I don't like, or see something I do like, and keep that in the back of my head for when I want to actually boost things. But yeah, a lot of the times it's just sweeping for those frequencies and taking out shit I don't like.
Yeah. Has there, with vocals specifically, has there been a technique using Pro Q that you've always followed, sort of, a sort of some type of technique that works every time for every vocal?
I wouldn't say it's nothing like there's no special trick of the trade that I do. It's all just kind of standard stuff, but it's about training your ears to know what that EQ is going to do, and to train your ears to find those frequencies that just naturally sound bad, or those frequencies that sound good.
Okay. Well, how do you deal with vocals that come in already with autotune on?
I'm okay if there's tuning on a vocal. I'm totally okay with that, because a lot of artists are very particular with their tuning. So if they like their auto-tune a certain way, no problem. Send it to me like that. I'll work with it. I don't like when I'm sent vocals that are already squashed, like with compression, or if they're overly bright with EQ. Obviously, if there's reverb, that's such a pain to deal with as an engineer. So any of those kind of things, I try to just send it to me totally dry if you can. Send me the reference as well so I can hear what you're going for and just kind of manipulate that same sound that you were going for, just in a cleaner way.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
How do you organize a new mixing project when you start?
Organizing to me is so crucial. I'm such an organized freak. So everything like in my studio, I like to keep it a certain way. I know exactly where everything is. I don't like cords hanging or that kind of thing. So I'm the same way when it comes to my Pro Tools sessions. I'll label everything. Everything's color coded. Everything's in the order that I specifically like things to be in. My beat stems are first, my vocals, lead vocals are next, then any background vocals, ad-libs at the bottom, that kind of thing. It's different for everybody. Everyone's got their own, technique of how they order things, but I do what's right for me and get the job done.
Cool. So when you get a mixing project, what are the elements you like to mix first?
So typically if I have, granted, no one's sending me a 2-track kind of mix. So if I have everything to work with, it depends sometimes, but I always start with beat stems first. The stems, for let's say a hip hop track, where the drums are maybe the driving point of the song. I'll usually start with that first. I'll start with my kick. I'll move on to my snare, hi-hats, percussion, that kind of thing. Then I'll move on to bass usually. I'll get that sitting nice with the drums. Then I'll move on to melodic elements in the beat, and then do my vocals after that.
Is there a plugin that will most likely make it to every single track when you're mixing?
It would probably just be something basic like FabFilter Pro Q3 or something like that, because it's just to me, it's my favorite EQ, like visual EQ. If we're not talking like Pultex or something like that, So to me, that's probably the thing that's on the most in a Pro Tools session.
What do you think the difference is between a pro mixer and somebody like a bedroom producer?
I would say probably just experience, to be honest. If you want to call somebody a pro mixer, they've probably been around for a while.
Right.
And they probably just know what they're doing, and you could probably tell by the sound or the quality that they're providing. Whereas somebody in a bedroom, and that's not to shit on anybody in a bedroom. I am working in a bedroom technically.
Right.
Because we're in my condo, my home studio right now, in what is actually the master bedroom. So it's not to say that you can't be pro in a bedroom studio or something like that. But I think it's just the experience and the knowledge that goes into it that would differentiate a pro mixer from a bedroom or amateur mixer.
When you get a mixing project, what's your favorite element to mix and why?
I love vocals. I love vocals. Not to say I don't like mixing the beat elements, but for me, vocals are always like, in most cases, the star of the song. So to me, I don't know, just making them sit the way that they need to sit, or just adding creative elements to it to make things pop out at certain points or that kind of thing. I don't know, there's just something so fun to me about that.
When you're trying to fit the vocals in the mix, are you doing more work around the vocals or to the vocals themselves?
Both, because when I start with, as I said earlier, when I'm starting with mixing the beat files, I am thinking ahead, knowing where that vocal is going to sit. Frequency-wise, if it's a female singer who's really high-end, kind of heavy, I'm knowing while I'm mixing those beat stems that, hey, look, I gotta leave some high-end room for the vocal here. Or if it's a low male hip-hop artist, something like that, I know he's probably going to occupy that more low mid-ish kind of range. So I'm thinking about that when I'm mixing those beat stems, to be able to carve out stuff from melodic elements of the beat or the drums, to make sure that the vocals have room to sit.
So you identify the strength of the vocal and you sort of work around to make space for that element to sort of shine.
Exactly.
Cool.
That's it.
Oh, that's a great approach.
Yeah.
What is the hardest part about mixing, and what do you do to make it easier?
I don't know, man. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say there's something that's hard about it, especially when you've been doing it for a bit. It all just kind of comes naturally. And it's not that something's necessarily hard. Something might be time consuming because maybe you have to do a little more work on the vocal because it wasn't recorded the greatest, or maybe you have to really find you got 60 beat stems, and you've got to find a way for all these different synths and pianos and guitars and whatever to kind of sit together.
Right.
So I'd say, if anything, that's probably the hardest thing. But it's not even that like it's necessarily hard. It can just be maybe time consuming.
More consumed. Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Do you keep anything in mind when mixing a project before it is sent out to a mastering engineer, where it'll be mastered somewhere else?
Yeah, so I'll definitely leave some headroom. I won't apply any limiters or anything like that. I'll just leave that up to them.
Is there a standard headroom that you usually stick to?
I usually aim for about, give about 5-6 dBs.
Okay.
Give or take.
What's the most underrated technique that's helping you with mixing right now?
Underrated technique. Something that I've been on for probably the last year or so is what's called like top-down mixing.
Okay.
I don't know if you're aware of that.
No,
It's
let's hear
like a lot of times people will mix the individual elements in the song first, like they'll do their beat stems, their vocal stems, and then start applying things to their mix bus after that to, just do an overall, like you could call it like mastering, right? And then you apply your limiters and that kind of stuff. I've started doing an approach where you go from the top down. So instead of approaching the individual elements of the song first, I go right to my mix bus.
Wow.
And I'll do some light EQing, or I'll do some...
On the whole mix?
The whole thing.
Cool.
I'm not touching any element in the mix.
Okay.
I'm just going right to my mix bus, and I'm compressing it a little bit, just light compression. I might add some saturation. I've got a lot of, well, not a lot, but I've got some gear behind me that...
Yeah, it'll be a B-roll.
B-roll, yeah. I'll just run it through the gear right from the start, so I know what the gear, or how the gear is going to react to things. You just get an overall kind of roundness of the song, and then you go into the individual elements.
So then would you turn that off and then go into digital? Or would you keep it all saturation and everything on?
Everything's kind of going at once.
Okay.
And I'll turn things off, like when I get into the individual stem mixing, but because sometimes you might want to hear what it doesn't sound like or what it sounds like without the saturation, or without the EQ that you put on, or without the compression.
Right.
Because you might find that your compressor starts working harder once you start applying some effects to the beat or the vocals. But then you also kind of put your limiter on at the start too. And I don't necessarily squash the hell out of it, but I'll put it on and maybe get like -11 LUFS kind of thing, so that I know it's already at like a decent loud enough peak, but we're not squashing it at like 7 LUFS kind of thing. I'll save that if I want to push it more. I'll save that for the end, once I'm done kind of everything. But now you kind of get this approach where you know how your limiters are going to react going into it, instead of applying the limiters after, where sometimes it can bring out certain things in your mix that you're like, oh, why'd that limiter just make my snare so much brighter? Right. Or why does my vocal seem more on top of the beat now? So when you do it going into it right from the start, you're already anticipating what it's going to do.
And do you use the approach of mixing between stereo and mono? If so, how do you use that?
To be honest, man, like I'm always like doing stuff in stereo. I know a lot of people like to do like switch it to mono or something.
I know Master Plan, the plugin, has the mono switch, and I usually put it on my sort of master bus, and I hit that mono and as soon as I hit that, sometimes that snare, I was like, whoa, it did not seem that loud. For sure. In stereo. But yeah, what's your take on just mixing stereo?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do it every once in a while, like I'll switch it to mono, but for the most part, like 90% of the time, I'm always just in stereo.
If it sounds good, it sounds good.
I don't know, it's just something that works for me, man.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Awesome, okay. All right, hardware versus digital plugins.
Is that like, what would I prefer? Or
what would you prefer? What do you find quality? What do you use it for? What, maybe?
I think there's a time and place for both. I think a lot of the times if I'm recording with somebody, I like to get a bit of color going in. So I'll run it through a preamp, I'll run it through a compressor. Sometimes I'll even throw an EQ on going in. I like to kind of get things to a point where it makes it easier for me in the mix. I don't like overdoing anything, especially with compression, because sometimes you can get carried away and you don't even realize your compressor is working too hard. And then when it comes time for the actual mixing, you're like, shit, it's already like baked in now. Yeah. So I take it really easy, but even just if the compressor's getting like -1, you know what I mean? I'm using it almost more for the color of that compressor than the actual compression itself.
How should one organize and export their files when sending it to a mixing engineer?
Oh man, I've got some videos on this on like my Instagram, because sometimes people send you stuff and it's just such a mess. Like there's just stuff everywhere, nothing's labeled. No one gives you the BPM for the song. No one tells you the key. You've got to figure all that out yourself, which is fine. But if somebody sends me a full song, beat stems, vocal stems, all that kind of stuff, if you put the beat files in one folder, the vocals in one folder, and points, if you put like harmonies and backgrounds in a separate folder from the lead stuff, bonus points. And then even if you send that all in one folder and you have like a note in that folder as well, tells you the BPM, tells you the key of the song, maybe the producer has some notes about what they want, or the artist has some notes about what they want, ideal.
Follow that strategy, please.
Please.
When mixing for other clients, how much creative freedom do you actually have?
With me specifically, I tend to have a lot of creative freedom, and I've kind of built my career around that. Because I started out as a producer, I've always been a more creative engineer instead of a technical engineer. I'm a good balance of both, but a lot of clients come to me because they want my creative input in a song, because I might take chorus or something, take a line from there, put it to the intro, and put some kind of weird effect on it that just kind of spaces it out or something. And then they get that back and they're like, that wasn't even there, but it sounds amazing.
Right.
So I love doing those kind of things. And if somebody doesn't like something I do, it's no problem. I just say, yeah, I can take that off. But 9 times out of 10, people are grateful when you send them something, or when I send them something, and it was never even there to begin with.
When it comes to creative freedom in mixing, do you just stick to mixing techniques, like maybe adding an effect, or do you sometimes lean over to adding maybe a guitar or something like that, or do you ever go that far?
Every once in a while I will. If there's something more on the production end of things, I'll usually run it by the client first.
Right.
Because sometimes that can make a big deal.
For sure.
If you're adding a guitar part or you're changing something, or sometimes I've had it where a bass line is out of key or something like that. And I'll say, hey, do you mind, like it's a very simple bass line, I can just replay it and hit the proper notes. You know what I mean? So when it comes to production stuff, I'll usually run it by the client first.
What are your go-to plugins when mixing vocals?
Go-to plugins when mixing vocals. This always changes what I use on a daily, weekly basis, monthly basis. I'd say right now, if I were to pull up a session, well, auto-tune first if it's necessary. If not, no problem. Then I'd put on FabFilter Pro Q3 for reductive EQ, followed by some kind of compressor, dependent on the vocal. Could be an 1176 kind of style, could be an LA2A. After that, I'll usually DS. After that, I'll go probably do some more EQing, but more like broad EQing, where the first EQ is more surgical. So maybe like Neutron by Isotope, something like that. Followed by Soothe 2. I like to tame my mid-range with that a lot of the times. Followed by maybe some saturation. That can always change. I like Spectre a lot. That's one of my go-tos for saturation though, especially right now. And then I might even compress a little bit right at the end of my chain with probably FabFilter's Pro C.
Oh yeah, I love that one. Yeah, for sure. Great. What are your top 3 plugins that you've been recently using for vocals?
Well, it would be...
Besides EQ and compression, something...
Are we talking like fun plugins?
Fun plugins.
Okay. If we're talking more fun effects, like a reverb, for instance, my go-to right now is probably the Valhalla reverb.
Yep.
There's something about that I just love right now.
I know.
So I've been on that a lot. If we're talking delay, I like to keep my delays pretty simple, like with an H delay or Slate Digital's repeater, something like that. But then I like to put plugins on after that to affect the reverb or affect the delay differently, instead of just your stock stuff in the plugin itself. I don't know, besides that, you could have some fun with something like Sound Toys,
Echo Boy,
or their Format kind of thing, like something like that. Yeah, maybe those three.
All right. Do you ever mix in headphones, or is speakers your main point of view?
I'm always on monitors for the most part. I might reference some stuff, like at the end I'll put on different headphones just to see how my mix translates to like AirPod style headphones or just studio headphones. But for the most part, it's all through the monitors.
Okay. What makes a happy music producer?
That's a good question too, man. If we were, okay, let's backpedal a bit to a question you asked earlier. Organizing your files. Cool. You send me some files and everything's, like I said earlier, in separate folders. You give me the BPM, all that kind of stuff. It makes it so much easier. I just upload the files, put it in the system, immediately put the BPM in there. I immediately, if I got to put auto-tune on, I know the key. Makes things so much easier.
If you're reaching to Ty, make him happy.
Please do.
I mean, I see you mixing a lot of projects. Check out Ty's Instagram. How do you avoid getting too repetitive and stay a little bit more inspired with new mixing techniques?
Man, I'm one of those guys that's always trying to learn new stuff. That's a great thing about what we do as producers and engineers. You can always find something that you don't know.
Right.
No matter how old you are, no matter how experienced you are, however many years you've been doing this. I'm, like I said, 11 years in it full-time. Even before that, I was still just part-time, but 11 years full-time, and I'm still on like YouTube every day, just looking up techniques from other engineers or other producers. I love it, man. Yeah. You can always learn something.
What advice would you tell your younger self coming up as a full-time producer?
Great question. One of the big things I would say is if you're trying to start to get, or if you're getting into gear, for instance, the first piece of gear I ever got was a preamp, and it was the Warm Audio WA73.
Okay.
It's around, I think at the time it was like $1,000. I think it's still somewhere around there too. Looking back at it though, I would have preferred, even if I didn't have the money for a better preamp at the time, I would have probably just told myself, don't get that. And I'm not shitting on Warm Audio by any means, but I'd say like hold off, save up another $1,000 and get something with some good substantial
value.
Yeah, because it's going to appreciate in value over time.
And you're not going to learn bad things, right?
Exactly. So I'd probably say something like that. Like, if you think you want something, but there's something better you want that you think you'll want further down the road, save up, do yourself the favor, hold off a little bit longer. You've held off this long so far, and just get that really good piece. If it's like a staple, if it's your one preamp, if it's your one compressor, I think you're better off a lot of the times just getting that like staple piece.
Patient and knowing what sound you want.
Yeah, just going with the ones that have been around forever and have, you know, tried the test of time.
Yeah, for sure. Does guitar need compression? If yes, then why?
I think it depends on how it was recorded to begin with. Sometimes the player is just like, their dynamic is so good with how they play that it doesn't really need to be touched all that much. I'm a big fan of, if it sounds good, there's not much you have to do to it. You don't always have to compress something. You don't always have to EQ something. If something just sounds good, it sounds good. Don't touch it. So yes and no.
If you receive vocals that are recorded badly, do you have any techniques for recovering some of it? If there's no way to record that same vocal?
Yeah, I mean, there's always things to that can clean up a vocal for sure. There's techniques, even just simple EQing to reduce muddiness if the vocal's too muddy. If the vocal's a little too harsh, you know, you can. There's tricks of the trade you can use.
Is there any specific technique that you've used?
I mean, with muddiness, it would just be a simple dip of the mids, usually in the low mids. If something's too bright, a lot of the times I like to put a multi-band compressor on it and tame that high end, but you're not, if you just were to EQ it, then you're just kind of killing it completely in a sense, whereas multi-band compression can kind of do it in a bit smoother of a way, for instance. There's, you know, a lot of great plugins out there to remove clicks in a vocal or something like that. Yeah, or the hum in a vocal. Like Isotope makes some good ones, the RX package. So things like that to fix little mistakes that might be in a recording.
Or Waves has a cool one where you can reverb, like you can take away the reverb, which is
for sure. Cool. I've seen that. I don't have it, but
yeah, cool. What, like when you receive an actual project for mixing, right? What plugins do you see that are kind of overused?
Overused by the person that sent it to me?
Yeah, by just generally people. Like, is there a consistent plugin that you see on most of the mixes?
Most times I'd probably say it's just the tuning. Yeah. It's over auto-tuned. You know what I mean? But sometimes that's just the creative vibe that the artist wants for the song. But a lot of the times if they send it with auto-tune, I can't always go in and melodyne something how I might want, because the auto-tune just reacts a certain way. So if it's already baked into it, I can throw melodyne on it and fix little things, but it's still gonna sound unnatural in a sense. So I'd say that's probably the one thing that's baked in a lot of times. Other than that, I'd say people overusing like UAD plugins. Like baking it in while they're recording.
Oh, right. I was gonna say I use them all the time.
Hey man, I love UAD plugins. Yeah. I think a lot of times artists can get carried away with them while they're using them. They'll use them like in unison.
Right.
Where they bake it in while they're recording. They'll throw the Neve on, they'll throw a compressor on, and they might not know how to use it properly, but they just think, oh, I'll throw this 1073 on and my vocal is going to sound like it was recorded through an actual 1073. Yeah. But that's not always the case. You get a lot of digital like brightness from those kind of plugins sometimes, which you can't, once it's in there, it's in there.
Was there ever a plugin that gave you a one-button solution for something that took you a while to do?
I think, well, maybe like Melodyne was probably a game changer for me when I actually heard what Melodyne was like years ago and was like, oh, like I can actually like pull this note up or down if it's out of key.
In Logic, it's flex mode.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'd say Melodyne was probably one of those big ones where it's like, this is amazing. Right. I can now make a bad singer sound good, and I can make a good singer sound great. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I'd probably say that's kind of the first thing that's coming to mind.
Cool. So as a mixing engineer, what's your ultimate goal as a full-time producer? Is it just to mix as many projects as you can, get a big placement? Well, what would be your goal in this?
I mean, placements are always that's what everyone's always chasing for the most part. Throughout my whole career, I've been, for the most part, dealing with independent artists. I've had some major label placements and stuff like that, obviously, but for the most part, it's more indie artists that I work with. But man, I'm trying to get that plaque as everybody else is.
What was your biggest learning curve when it comes to mixing?
I mean, I could give you a more generic, like, oh, this plugin was like, I had to really figure this out and it changed everything. But to be honest, like the main thing doesn't even have to do with like technical mixing. It's about more of the business side of things. It's about how to find the work for you to be able to mix. Right. So I'd say the learning curve was trying to find the work and trying to convince people that I'm the guy that can make your stuff sound good. So it's really just diving into that and like figuring out how to use social media to your advantage and what's something that can intrigue clients to want to work with you. So it was more of that kind of stuff, because a lot of people don't think about the business side of engineering. They just think, oh, I can just mix and I can be the best mixer in the world. But if you don't necessarily know how to get your stuff heard or just get the work in general, then if you're the best mixing engineer in the world, but no one's coming to you, then what are you doing? Right. So that, to me, was the biggest learning curve.
With advancements in technology, how do you see the role of studios evolving in the future?
I mean, I think everybody's seen the evolution of the bedroom studio. You know what I mean? People just having more home setups these days. I think that's going to be even more of a thing moving forward, where technology is just so readily accessible to people that you can make fantastic recordings or you can make great mixes just in your bedroom. So I think that's going to become even more of a thing moving forward. And the so-called like big studios, they're already kind of starting to fizzle out a bit. They're always going to be there, but they're not as prominent as they once were.
It's not a have to.
Exactly.
It's just not the clear path anymore.
100%.
All right. I see you have an amazing mic over there. Please tell us about your mic. Why did you choose this one?
Yeah, so that's the Neumann U87. Even before I had that, if I was at a studio, I just always would love to use that if I had the option for it. So when it came time for me to really kind of step up and get a big boy microphone, if you want to call it, to me,
bigger than my microphone.
That was just the one I just always dreamt of having. So thankfully, I was able to pull the trigger on that several years ago. And
so why don't you tell us what you have right behind you in your gear arsenal? Why did you choose certain things?
Yeah, so I've got certain things that relate to more recording, and I've got things that relate more to mixing. The first thing I ever got, like I said, was a Warm Audio preamp. I don't have that current, I do have it, but it's not in my rack. After that, I got my UA 1176 compressor. I really wanted just a good vocal compressor. After that, I went with 500 series stuff. So I got the Neve 1073. I have the API 512C. I've got the Moog EQ4, which I love. And recently I picked up 2 Rupert Neve 542s, which are tape emulators that sound fantastic on your mix bus, on your drum bus, that kind of thing. And then besides that, at some point I got a second kind of vocal compressor, the Audioscape LA2A. Shout out to Audioscape, I love them. And then I've got 2 bus compressors. I've got one from Stam Audio and I've got one from Audioscape as well. And I've also got the SSL Fusion.
That's a great one.
And then at the top, it's just my Apollo X8 interface.
Okay, great. What is your advice on choosing an interface? When maybe if you're a beginner producer, do you, just like with your earlier experience, do you suggest saving up and getting maybe like a bigger unit? Or does it matter? It depends on what you need, or? Yeah,
I mean, obviously price is always going to factor into things, but if you can save up a little bit and go for that one that you really want, you won't regret it further down the road. And like I said earlier, it's going to either keep its value or even appreciate in value.
Right.
Whereas the cheap stuff will you'll lose money at the end of the day if you decide, hey, I want to sell this. So yeah, I'd probably say that, man.
And I see you have the speakers that I actually haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about them? Why did you choose these ones?
Yeah, these are the Dyne Audio LYD8s. When I needed to upgrade my monitors, because prior to this I had the Yamaha HS8s. Which I love. I still to this day I love. Yeah, to me that's like your best bang for your buck. At one point I just reached a level where I was like, I just want something a bit better. And I tried a bunch of different monitors. I went to Long McQuaid,
our favorite music store in Toronto.
Music store, yeah. Went there and just brought some mixes along with me on my phone. Plugged into their system, played through a bunch of speakers. I tried like some Focals. The Dynes, I tried Adams, I don't know, a bunch of shit. And for whatever reason, I just liked the sound of these Dynes. Yeah. So I went with that, and they were the right size for my room. I'm not in a huge room, so they just like filled the space. I could have gone a bit bigger, but then it might have been a bit too much for the room. So I don't know, those Dynes were just perfect for me.
Awesome, I'm glad they worked out.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your mixing here, your mixing setup? What is it? Why did you choose this?
Yeah, I've got 2 SSL UF8s. They're chained together there. I put a little like case around them. I had that custom built. They're just totally digital controllers, so they sync up to any DAW. With me in particular, sync up to Pro Tools. They've got great features on it that just kind of speeds up your workflow. That's why I went with that.
When getting a mix board like that, do you suggest getting a certain amount of channels? Or do you switch? You know what I mean? You just
no, not necessarily. I think everyone's going to be different. I just personally, like, you could easily go with one of those and be totally good because you can bank through all your tracks, right? In your DAW. For me, I just liked having the extra one just for a little more, because I like touching stuff. You know what I mean? I don't always just like to just click with the mouse. So for me, getting the two of them, it was just right for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. If somebody wants to get into mixing full-time, what is your advice for them?
Just study the game. Really understand what you're doing. Study the greats that have come before you, and just learn. Go on YouTube. You can go to audio school if you want, but there's a lot of stuff on YouTube these days from guys like this guy, guys like me, a lot of people out there giving you great tips and advice on plugins, gear, microphones, all that stuff. Hit it all. Just go down the rabbit hole on YouTube, learn it all, digest it all, but find a way to do it that's right for you. Just because somebody else shows you how they mix the song, it doesn't mean you have to copy it exactly. Understand why they use that gear, understand why they use those plugins, and then, use it in a way that's right for your style of mixing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ty.
Of course, brother.
Why don't you tell us how can people reach out to you? Where are you at? How can people find you?
Everything is just at Ty Dinelli.
Great.
TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. YouTube, I've got my YouTube page up, so go check that out. And my website, www.riskengineeringmusic.com. You can book me for recording, mixing, mastering, whatever.
Well, thank you for all the knowledge you've dropped here.
Thank you,
Helped
brother.
a lot of people.
Of course.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Sounds good, bro.
All right.
Boom. Beauty.